So hello, this is my response or my discussion for week two. Um, so our week two prompts were: how was difference constructed in the ancient, medieval, early modern periods, and how did people of African descent manage in these periods? So I'm going to probably try to answer those at the same time instead of separately. So hopefully I catch everything. I have some writing prompts for myself, and I have the reading with me. Well, I have Hang's reading with me, The Invention of Race in the European Middle Ages, chapter 4, color. So I actually got really excited about this. This is something that I'm very curious about, a subject I'm very curious about, and that is when was there this differentiation of color? When did we see a change or a shift in human evolution where we started to differentiate and then use that to subjugate or colonize or look down and rise up one race and oppress another? And so I've always been curious, like, when in evolution did folks start doing that? And so I got excited about this chapter. And it's interesting how she kind of covers this topic and this subject, in the way she's doing that is by using a lot of the visual art from the ancient and early medieval periods. So what we notice is that in ancient art, they actually celebrated, color. You saw a lot more color in art. There was an example here where in ancient Greek and Roman art, you know depicted the gods and the Greek gods, Odysseus, as dark, and like people who they thought of as frail or weak, or sickly, as pale and light skinned. So there, at that point, you seemed that like color and blackness was kind of celebrated, and looked upon as vigor and strength, right, and power. But then, if you start looking at the work of like Madeline Cavinus, which Hang uses, you start to see that art really changes, right? And so, even in the early period, in the ancient and early medieval periods, they were still using different hues, right? That people weren't this pasty white color in the art, that they are, or real pale in their color. I think at one point they talk about how whiteness became literally transparent and invisible. So you still start to see that in the early medieval period, but around the mid 12th century, there's a change, and so I believe this change starts to come from religion, right, where they start to look at blackness as evil and dark. I think they antiquate it with holiness as well, and salvation, and start to look. Or and look at whiteness as salvation or being holy, and so that starts to show up in artwork, and you see a change of how they really start to depict people really light, right? And even and you look at the art that comes in later, you start to see that they start to that really changes. And it was interesting, the example that she used with, the Cavaness, and I hope I'm saying that, uses with Louis the Ninth, right? And within his family, and even if you look at the family portraits and the paintings within that family, they started off a little darker, and then as generations continued, they were looked a lot more angled, a lot more white, right? And then you start to see a change on how blackness is depicted in art, and she talks about how they start to portray. You start to see a portrayal of killers and executioners as as people of as black people of color, and so they start to vilify basically vilify people of color. So that's where you start to see a change in how people of African descent are treated, right? So as art, starts to depict, and you start to see that art, and it's basically through the influence of religion, and basically how they identify holiness, right, and equating it with whiteness, you start to see that change in treatment as well. Um, and you start to see that differentiation due to like that through racial epidemiology, right, through blackness and through the color of skin. What is interesting, though, I feel, is that I appreciate, and it's something like I mentioned it before that I was very curious about, and it's I like her use of her example and really looking at the visual art of that time period. But you start to look at what happened in the pre-modern area, and basically this started to influence how people of color were treated, people of African descent. So now we're starting to look at this was the cause of slavery, oppression, just this, some of the worst atrocities that the history of humanity has seen kind of stemmed from this differentiation that began. And it's interesting that she uses, she's using art and she doesn't really discuss that. And I look at it and I see this almost like imperialistic nostalgia, right? Like I get that it's very academic, but it's just, for me, it was, as I'm reading it, I was like, in the back of my head, I'm still thinking, well, yeah, but this was the cause of like some huge atrocities, right? And I even, looking at my background, being a Chicanx, person, human, and I look at the ancestry of how my people came about and what happened in the Americas and what happened in North America with the indigenous humans in North America through the colonization of North America through Europe, and these ideals coming to Europe. You see that all of that differentiation led to this led to the colonization, how it spread over, and this ideology even became what America is essentially founded on, which is white Christianity. So I felt like it was a little soft in how she kind of discussed this. I also am, with what's going on in the times, I feel like I'm very sensitive in that. So I don't know if I'm just looking for it there, but for me personally, that's how I kind of looked at it. So, and I believe, that's kind of what I think. Just looking at what's happening in our times, looking at this, and even in other classes that I've been in, I tend to be, and I notice that other students too tend to be really hypersensitive on the conversation of race, right? And really trying to look at it critically. And so she does do that here, but I also think that it didn't really look at it in what the consequence was for this differentiation over time that happened, right? And what exactly it caused. And on the final note too is also, as I was reading African Europeans by Olivia Toole, I also saw some parallels there with Latina immigrants in the United States, and the cross sectionalities and a lot of the similarities that fall in line with the the Europeans of African descent. So I just thought that was also very interesting. So I see these connections, right? And so so thank you very much. And I was hoping I covered all of it, and I think I did, looking at my notes.